I know that you wanted to hear the rest of the story of Joseph, and that's why you have joined us again today. We're glad you have. Joseph has been called upon by Pharaoh to reveal a dream that Pharaoh has had which has disturbed him greatly. And we're looking now in Genesis chapter 41 and verse 17. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 cattle, fat, fleshed, and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other cattle came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I had never seen in the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored cattle did eat up the first 7 fat cattle. And when they had eaten them up, it would not be known what they had eaten them up, but they were still ill-favored as at the beginning. So I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. Now we're going to start in again, and we're going to show you the gift of the word of knowledge and the word of wisdom exercised here. Joseph said unto Pharaoh, he starts right in now. He reveals the meaning of the dream. The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed, S-H-E-W-E-D, or some of your other versions will say show. This means a word of knowledge, to reveal, to see, to show, spiritual eyes. To show Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cattle are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, and the dream is one. The 7 thin and ill-favored cattle that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty years blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he shows Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt. Now please remember, Joseph is bringing the revelation here. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very, very grievous. Now that is the end of the gift of the word of knowledge. Right there, it stops there. I said that the gift of the word of wisdom and the word of knowledge go together. Now you're going to see the peanut butter, ready, between the slices of bread. Starting in, and I'm going to come back to this one verse when we come into the final definition of the word of wisdom. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, and it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now the word of wisdom some more. Listen very carefully. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up a half of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Does your Bible say a half? No? What does it say? It says a fifth. Really? Oh, I guess I must be reading again out of the reversed vision. Well, you know, it's only common sense, the way I see it, that if there is going to be 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine, that in order to look after the land properly and look after the people properly, I mean, my common, ordinary, everyday judgment would say that you take up half of what comes in during the land, off the land during the 7 years of plenty, and it will feed the 7 years of famine. Doesn't that make sense to you? Sure. Well, we're all in agreement, isn't it? I'm not the only one that thinks this way, right? He goes on to say, let them gather all the food of these good years that come and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh. Let them keep food in the cities, food in the storehouses, and just store up food all over the place. I want to tell you something here. You see, Joseph is exercising the gift of the word of wisdom when he says, take up a fifth part of the land. Joseph has been in the dungeon for several years. You must remember this. Joseph has had to be pulled out of the dungeon, and they had to shave him, change his raiment, get rid of all the lice, the vermin that's crawling all over him, get rid of the smell on his body, take off his smelly clothes. He's been down in a dungeon. It's not like the jails that we have today. It's down under the ground, smelly, dirty. Rats have been running around. He has been completely out of it. Everything that's going on up there in the outside world, he's been out of it. He doesn't know anything that's going on. He has nothing. He has no knowledge of the death or the birth rates. He has no knowledge of how many marriages have taken place. He knows nothing of the immigration or emigration. He knows nothing of the annual grain production under normal circumstances at this point, nor consumption. He knows nothing of all of these things. He knows nothing about the stock market changes. He knows nothing about the new inventions, whether war has been declared, whether there's been assassinations. He knows nothing of this. He's been completely out of it. He knows nothing of what's been going on under normal circumstances, let alone give an intelligent, reasonable account of what could be done under a time or during years of plenty. Are you following me? He has been brought up out of the dungeon. He had to be shaved, changing his raiment. He has been completely out of it, so that we know that the revelation that he gives, the gift of the word of wisdom that he gives at this point, must be a word of wisdom. A word of wisdom is what to do about the situation once you know the facts. The facts are this: there are 7 years of plenty, there are 7 years of famine. 1 plus 1 equals 2. As I showed you in several seminars ago, 1 plus 1 equals 2. That's knowledge. He's got knowledge now. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. He's got the knowledge. The word of wisdom is, what am I going to do about these facts? Well, take my sensitivity would say, take up half of the grain and it'll feed the 7 years of famine. But how would he possibly know? How could he, accepting that it would be a word of wisdom, know that a fifth part of the production of that grain would be sufficient to supply for the 7 years of famine that were going to come, that would only not have to feed Egypt, but Israel and many other places coming in around? That had to be given by God. Now he goes on to say, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, verse 37, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one in this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed. Would you like to underline that word show? I wonder how many times we pass over these words that really pop out at us and show us exactly what gift we're talking about. It's the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom. Show, spiritualize. For as God hath showed thee this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Now I get a charge out of this part. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over the land of Egypt. Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, put it upon Joseph's hand, arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And so we find in verse 46 that Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. We note also he received a wife and they had children. Joseph is now 30 years old. But here, you see the word of wisdom? Do you know that the word of wisdom came out of Joseph's mouth and he never even realized what he was saying? Don't you think for 1 minute that Joseph had no knowledge whatsoever, that when he said, look out a man discreet and wise and set him over the land of Egypt, that he had any idea that he was talking about himself? He'd been down in the dungeon. He'd been out of it. He wasn't even anywhere near Pharaoh or anything that was going on. And yet he says, look out a man discreet and wise. I bet you anything, he probably was so taken back when Pharaoh said, look, you are going to be next in line to me. That probably would have been the last thing he'd have ever dreamed of. And the word of wisdom brought him into that position. I'm going to tell you something. Oh, you know, when I started to exercise the gifts of the Spirit, it has brought me into places I would have never, never, never dreamed of, including television. Why, my goodness, as I was growing up, I don't suppose I ever went 60 miles out of where I lived, from one direction to the other. Hardly ever went anywhere, hardly ever did anything. And once you start to exercise the gifts of the Spirit, I'll tell you, they will lead you into the most fantastic places, to do the most fantastic things, and to see the most fantastic people. It is a very exciting life, and the gifts of the Spirit will help to do this in your life. Are you kind of bored with living? Let me tell you, be filled with the Spirit. Begin to exercise the gifts of the Spirit, and some exciting things will start taking place in your life. Can't help but. So Joseph never even dreamed that this was going to happen. Now we note that the years of plenty came into being. And of course they gathered up so much corn in all the land that it was left, it says, verse 49, it was gathered as the sand of the sea, so much of it that he left off numbering it, for it was without number. And we note that 2 sons here are born to Joseph. And verse 53, the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt was ended. And now we find Joseph is 37 years old. Let's look at some simple knowledge, shall we? Joseph is what, 37 years old? How old was he when he was sold out by his brothers? 17. All right, we're looking at some very basic knowledge. Not the gift of the word of knowledge, just ordinary, common knowledge, if we went to school and learned it correctly. And do I get my figures correct there? Is that correct in your eyes? Is that 20 years difference? Yes? You're in agreement? They say education is what you remembered after you've forgotten what you learned. Now, did you forget your figures? All right, I'm right. All right, I am right. All right, let's go. So 20 years has passed from the time that Joseph was sold into Egypt by his brothers unto now the time of famine has begun. Verse 54 of chapter 41, and 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto Egyptians, go unto Joseph. And he said, do you do? And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came unto Egypt to Joseph to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in the lands. Some people seem to think this in their lives, that in order for you to be spiritual, you have to sort of separate your spiritual life from your regular, ordinary, secular duties. In other words, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I work on my job, I do my business, I do what I have to do in my worldly life. Now, if you believe then that Sunday is your day of worship, you will set aside your Sunday to go to church and to worship and to do whatever. Now you are going to take that part of your life, and now that part of your life is going to become, quote, religious. I have learned something in just ordinary, everyday living. We need to take the Lord Jesus Christ into every activity of our life. We cannot separate the secular from the spiritual. God is part of the whole. And you know something today, God is using, we term it lay people, people who are on secular jobs, doing an ordinary, average, workaday world. Some people are in management. Some people are working on labor jobs. It doesn't matter what job you're on. But let me tell you, God can use you in the exercise of the gifts of the Spirit, no matter what tool you have in your hand on your secular job. Joseph had been learning management, both in Potiphar's household in the dungeon. And he would have never learned management if he had stayed down in Dothan looking after the sheep. It was because of the exercise of the gifts of the Spirit, the word of knowledge and the word of wisdom, that God brought him into the place of management, and into the place of management so that he is now over all of Egypt under Pharaoh, next in line. God used his management ability to enhance and to bring out and to be part of the gifts of the Spirit. I'll say again, the gifts of the Spirit can lead you into some fantastic places. And not everybody has to be a preacher to exercise the gifts of the Spirit. Jesus took ignorant and unlearned men and turned them into the most fantastic characters that could exercise the gifts of the Spirit. But they were learned in their trades. They were expert fishermen, expert tax collectors, expert in their fields. But he turned them into something else. He turned them on, put them on fire. That's what he did. Now, chapter 42. Ho, ho! Woo, I like this one. When Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt. Now, who was Jacob? Joseph's father. You see, Joseph, well, whom he thought had been sold down, or who he thought was dead, he mourned over Joseph for years and years and years, thinking for sure that his son had died, was killed by an animal. And as you know, Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons. And so now he says, look, he says to his other sons sitting there, he says, hey, come on, you guys, don't just sit across the table looking at each other. Get off your backsides, he says, and go on down to Egypt and get some corn for us. We've got to have something to eat. So verse 3 says, Joseph's 10 brethren. Let's look at some more facts here. Joseph's 10 brethren. Which one would be missing out of this? Benji, the little fella, the little guffer? Yeah. He's not a little guffer anymore. I'd say he'd be grown up now since 20 years has passed, right? It says here that Jacob kept him at home because he was afraid that some mischief might befall him, like something that happened to Joseph years ago. So he kept Benji at home. Now it says, verse 4, Benji then, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not. The sons of Israel, or Jacob, came to buy corn among those that came from the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down themselves to him to the earth. Very simply, very nicely, very beautifully. I would call this a fulfillment of a dream. Would you not? Would you? You would say this too? Then you note, please, verse 7, Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spoke roughly to them. He's going to give them a bad time here for a little while. I think maybe he figures they deserve it. And he said to them, now you see, they didn't recognize him because he's speaking through an interpreter. And by the same token, he is in Egyptian clothing, an Egyptian garb, and he's completely looks like an Egyptian, so they would never even think possibly that it ever would be him. And they said, well, we came from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. Now, I like this verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said unto them, you're spies. Now, wouldn't you think that he would put his arms around them, hug them, and just make himself known to them right off the bat? Well, I wouldn't be a bit surprised, but what Joseph is using another word of wisdom here. To know what to do about the situation once he knows the facts. And I think probably he has matured enough to know that his brothers probably may need to know a nice, easy lesson or two. Now, we know that Joseph's heart was very tender, but sometimes people also must be trained. And of course, he speaks very roughly to them. And The part that I want you to remember right now is this part. Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them. Because as we come into our next seminar, I'm going to tell you a fantastic story. Will you join us then?